How did he start translating for the Grandmaster of Ninjutsu? How does that happen?
Yeah, I don't know. It just happened, right?
So you're training for a little while in Japan. Was it a certain amount of years beforehand, or it just seems like, one day you're training and the next minute, how do you end up sitting next to the Grandmaster of Ninjutsu, translating what he's saying? How does he even know you speak Japanese well enough to translate? It's really interesting that someone ends up in that position.
I never thought of it that way. It just kind of happened. Life happened, right? I know when I went to Japan, the first thing I did, I was on the plane on my way over, had no idea about Japanese. I had zero knowledge of Japanese. So I was literally on the plane, trying to figure out what katakana was, hiragana was, and I was trying to memorize those on the plane. And I figured I'd have to learn a little bit of Japanese just to get around. I wasn't thinking about translating for Hatsumi Sensei or anything like that.
So you start training in the dojo, and it just kind of evolves.
So I think it all started when I met Hatsumi Sensei for the first time. And I actually saw him for the first time in the dojo training when I was at ISA. I walked in, I saw the man, I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. He was like 64, and I say this all the time. He was just moving like an absolute demon, like just crazy, blew my mind. Everything he did, I couldn't understand. And here I was, 27, 28, physically fit, had been doing martial arts for, I don't know, 10 years or more. I hadn't even done Bujinkan before I got to Japan. Still, I had no idea what was happening, but I just knew that holy shit, this guy is amazing and I want to follow him. And we didn't have many people back then. Yeah, I have to remember this is 1994. So people think about Hatsumi Sensei with like, tons of people around and lots of translators and stuff. It wasn't like that, back then. It was still very small classes. Like during like the downtime, like December or summertime, there was like nobody in town. I mean, really, it was like it's like it is sort of now. I kind of went back that way now. So like December, there'd be like, four or five of us in the dojo with Hatsumi Sensei. That's it, at times. But that's beside the point. What I'm saying is that there were limited translators, right? And back in the day, we'd be training in ISA, and people were doing their best to translate. People who hadn't really studied Japanese very well were translating. They had just learned it kind of on the fly. And you knew there was a lot of mistakes being made because the translator says, like, well, I think he's talking about something like this, you know. And so you knew there was a lot of, errors being made. And I just felt like, I needed to have it unfiltered. I needed to hear it in my ears and in my brain for myself so that I could get the unadulterated, unfiltered, and maybe correct, maybe incorrect. I don't know, but at least I was doing my best to get it as correctly as I could from Hatsumi Sensei. The Buddhist sutras, they start out always, if you look at this Buddhist sutras, they'll start out like, I heard, right? And it's usually Ananda like writing this, a famous disciple of the Buddha. Like he'd start out the passage, I heard, which means he actually heard it from the Buddha, from the lips to his ears, right? And I'm not like trying to make this some sort of religion or anything, but I'm saying like that was how I wanted it to be. I heard it myself. I heard what he said, and there was no filter in between what Sensei was saying in my ears. Because here's a funny episode, right? So we're in the dojo once, and Mark O'Brien, he used to translate a lot. And I'm not trying to throw him under the bus at all. I just think it's funny because we've all made mistakes when we're translating. So Mark O'Brien was translating, and Sensei said something, and we're all like, "What the heck?" I didn't speak Japanese at that point, so I was totally reliant on like Andrew Young and Mark O'Brien, and so Mark was there, Andrew wasn't there. And Mark's like, well, and he's got this high-pitched voice, so it made it even funnier. He was like, well, I think he said that, you've got to piss in your pants and then you got to move. And we're all like, wait a minute, Mark. I don't know if he said that, but then again, you never know because Sensei said some outlandish things a lot. But the consensus is that he didn't say that. And we were trying to figure it all out. I mean, just from the get-go, I thought I had to get it for myself, right? I would forever be unsure, right? You just I just felt that I needed it, and then seeing all of the translators have so much troubles, it just made me even more so want to just grab it for myself. Not saying that I haven't made mistakes over the years, because I certainly have.
It's almost like you wanted the most direct transmission you could get.
Yeah, it's like that's why I went to Japan to train with Hatsumi Sensei. I mean, because I wanted that direct physical transmission, right? Body to body. And so why wouldn't I put all my effort and strength into learning the language as well? I mean,
Mm.
how could you read the scrolls then? How could you not be fooled? I mean, all you know, even if but now I understand. Even if you do speak Japanese, even if you do read Japanese, that you can be fooled by by scrolls or whatever, or be led down the wrong path by these things as well. But that being said, I wanted to read what Sensei wrote myself. I wanted to listen to what he was saying and comprehend it myself.
Mm.
It was a
There was,
selfish thing. It wasn't like I wanted to translate.
yeah, I don't know if it's selfish. It's just wanting to get the best quality that you could, and you worked hard to do that. So how does it then evolve? Do you just step up one day, he says something, and then you just suddenly start speaking it in English for people, or how does that happen?
I think it happens when you reach a certain proficiency in the language where you can understand what Hatsumi Sensei is saying. And so when there's a mistake, I didn't want to let that just go, right? I'd say, oh, wait a minute. I think, he actually said this, right? So, all of us who were there for a long time with Sensei, like Doug Wilson and me and Bruce and these guys, we didn't care like if we each made a mistake. We'd call each other out and be like, hey, I think you said this instead, oh, sorry. But some people did not like to be corrected or they wouldn't be corrected. They'd say, nope, I was right, so and I think we had a really good team of translators there, that we didn't mind. It wasn't like we were stepping on each other's toes. If I like cut in from Doug or Doug cut in from me or Bruce jumped in or whoever other translators were there. Sometimes Larry was there. If they jumped in, it didn't matter. We weren't offended. We didn't get our feelings hurt by it. We were just like, okay, yeah, like I didn't do a good job, or maybe I did do a good job, and they were just expounding on something that I hadn't heard, right? So it's kind of delicate at times because some translators were like, they wanted to be the boss, and uh,
Mm.
and if you corrected them or stepped, they think you stepped on your toes by jumping in, and that was kind of unfortunate. But what can you do?
It's interesting to hear you say that because all the times I trained there and all the years, it never seemed that way. It always seemed like such a flow of friendship and people, just conversation going on. It never seemed, yeah, like there would be any concerns. Everyone just seemed so friendly and cooperative, working together with how they translated.
Yeah, I think for the most part, we all were. Um, look, translating is tough. It's a tough job, man. But if you're trying to train, like physically, watch what Sensei's doing, and do it with your partner, and then having to be called out of that, every whatever it was, like minute to translate something. It's like the the brain had to work that much harder. Sometimes I just didn't want to translate. I'm like, people would ask me to translate. I don't want to. I just rather listen and train because it was easier. I felt like I got more out of of a lesson when I wasn't having to translate, 100% of the time.
Okay, that's really interesting as well.
I was happy when people jumped in. I'm like, yeah, go for it. Give me some time to relax.
How do you think you kind of evolved as a translator if you think back to when you first started translating and then years later as you were doing it? Is there things early on that you kind of felt that looking back, there was a big learning curve, or what did you sort of notice that you can you remember that you learned?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big learning curve for sure, right? Just learning how Hatsumi Sensei speaks. He speaks in a very colloquial or a Noda way, right? So he has certain accents or way they say things. Japan, if you don't know, like every area in Japan has certain different dialects. Takamatsu has had a dialect. We have a dialect in Tokyo. They have a dialect in Osaka. Like anywhere you go, there's a dialect, and it can be quite strong. Like you have no idea what they're saying, right? Like when Sensei would talk about how Takamatsu Sensei was saying, like I can get the gist of it because it's not too far off, like my relatives speak. But other dialects, you'd have no idea what they're saying, right? So it all depended what Sensei was talking about, and if he was going into some sort of dialect. But once you got used to his dialect, it got much easier. That being said, Sensei didn't let us rest on our laurels, or he didn't let us get lazy with translating. In that, he was always challenging us. Like Sensei would challenge you physically, right? He'd make sure that you couldn't do everything he was doing, right? He would keep
Yep.
pushing you, right? Same with translating. Like if I got too confident and I was just, whipping out the translations here and there, wham, 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 no problem. he'd be like, "Oh yeah," and he'd start whipping out some sort of old, historical notes and figures and dates, and he'd be like, "Try to translate that, Paul." Right? And I'd be like, "Oh, damn," I'd have no idea, and then we'd all have to like confer, between the translators, right? So he'd always smack you down a bit, right? When you think, you were like at the top, you're like, I'm at the top, I'm the best translator, I'm the best martial artist, whatever it was, he'd smack you down, say, oh yeah, try translating this, or try this move, or haven't seen this weapon before, have you? Something to smack you down, right? Um, and I wouldn't say put you in your place, but to show you that there's more to go, right?
It
Like
sounds
one,
like he was still teaching you, even though it wasn't physical.
all the time in all aspects, right? Whether it be translating your personality, that maybe you've got a sticking point in your personality. Hit on that, sometimes he really was working on you as a full being. I think
It's a very kind thing to do as a teacher, isn't it?
it is. I mean, as a student, it can be a little bit frustrating, right? Because you're thinking, I just got good, and now he's like, show me I can't do it, or pointing out things that you don't want to know about yourself. Yeah, I was very fortunate to have a teacher like that, but it can be uncomfortable at times too when you have to look at yourself um, objectively or closely.
I've noticed a few times when you've been reading things that Hatsumi Sensei has written, and you've spoken about, no, 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 he means this because you've got this other understanding of how he speaks and his tones and inflections, his wit and humor. And it seems like that carries over not just from translating to him verbally, but in what you're reading as well. Do you want to speak a little bit about how it helps you that way?
You mean reading in terms of like his writings or other writings or?
His writing specifically, a few times I've heard you read things that Hatsumi Sensei has written or translations that he's written, and you say, no, no, he speaks about this and it's in this inflection. And I found it very interesting that because you've got such a close communication with him, carries over into written as well.
A lot of what he wrote, he was talking about in class. He was basically doing stream of consciousness in class, like whatever was coming to his mind, he was boom talking it, and he would be surprised what he was saying. Sometimes he'd be like, did you hear that? He's like, someone write that down. Write that down for me later. Um, because these ideas were just like flooding, he was just pulling all these ideas in all the time, and he would just speak it, and then he'd be like, "Oh, I got to write that down." And someone remind me of that. Someone take a note, because he'd forget, like I do. I have these ideas, and then I'm like, "Oh, I got to write this down or make a video," and then I totally forget. And I think this will be the most awesome video ever, and I think, "Oh, I'll remember it tomorrow," and I totally forget, right? So he was like that. He was pulling all this inspiration in while he was training. And he often spoke about it in class. And then later that became the writing. So that when I went back and read it, I was there when he was first, when he was being struck by the inspiration. I heard him speaking about it. And he'd speak about it, for a week or two as he's kind of working through what it was that came to him at that time. So a lot of times I've heard it before. And also just sitting next to him, seeing him write. People, I think discounted sometimes the calligraphy. Like even I do the calligraphy now, and sometimes, you see people just getting bored. Oh, I gotta sit through this calligraphy lesson, or like, why do we have to wait for this? And even in my class, I do calligraphy. There's people like, they're bored with it, but I don't care because by sitting there next to him, watching what he writes, and then hearing the comments of why he's writing it, gives you a really better idea of what he's really about, what the kernel of his maybe being is. Not that I'm saying I know it or anything, but you get a better understanding of the man, right? And maybe what he means when he says a certain phrase or a certain word. And sometimes Sensei would just kind of take for granted that we knew something and start talking. So he would like talk about a complex subject with the understanding that we already knew this much of it, right?
Yeah.
And so that was sometimes difficult. Sometimes it even lost me because I was like, what is he talking about now? And Doug's like, oh, last week he talked about this. I'm like, oh, okay, now it makes sense, right?
And on that, then, what about the vibe or the feel? I don't know. Talk about vibration in voice and things like that. But when you're around someone and you're near them and you're doing that type of thing, you definitely pick up on the energy or the vibe of how they are expressing and feeling as a person. Was there anything that sort of stands out about that when you were translating, or even as he was painting?
I mean, you'd always tell the mood he was in, right? You know, whether he was in a a friendly mood or kind of like just got back from a taikai and a real like sharp, on like he's like gonna kill everybody, you know.
He always seemed the same to me. Was it? I wasn't around him anywhere near as much as you, but so in those, calm or coming in fired up, or was it a rhythm to this, or was it completely random, rare?
Every day is different, just like you and me, we wake up and every day is different, right? Um, but oftentimes he'd come back from like a taikai overseas and he'd be really ramped up, or right before he left, he's getting, kind of, ramped up for it. People think that, oh, going overseas and teaching is, like easy and no problem. It's just like it's fun, it's glamorous, right? And it's not. I mean, I'd watch him, start to get like sort of mentally and physically prepared for when he would go overseas because he didn't know who was going to be there. Of course, he's going to meet everybody with with a pure heart, with an open heart, with a playful heart. But even so, there may be someone who's going to challenge you, or they're likely people that you have that are not easy to deal with that you will have to deal with, right? And so I could see him getting ramped up in those times. What's that?
What would ramped up be like? What does that
Ramped up would be
mean?
like the training would get really kind of hard and intense and like sort of violent. And he just like lay it into us, right? Like he's actually, making sure it works again, type of thing. Going overseas, and this is a whole different topic, I think people kind of have a misconception of what that is, especially if you're going, maybe they've never been the person who goes overseas and teaches. But for me, and I think Sensei took it very seriously as well, that you have to be physically, mentally, and spiritually prepared for these things because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to come home, to be honest with you, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
But why I translated often is because there were also translators, not many, but some that would translate to push their own narrative. Say they would mistranslate, I don't know on purpose or not, but when they mistranslated it seemed awfully convenient that it was kind of pushing a certain narrative. And actually it was completely like opposite of what Sensei would say. Like he'd say, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't be thinking this way, and the person would say, you should be doing this, you should be thinking this way because that fit that person's narrative. Now maybe his ears just misheard it because of his bias, right, of wanting to do, this, right, versus this, what Sensei was actually saying. But I mean, I've heard translators say over like many times, like he would say, don't do this, and translator says, you've got to do this, and that's what I would try to chime in and usually those are the type of translators who would get angry with you if you jumped in.
is there a memorable time you can think of when you were translating that sort of comes to mind that stands out to you as a just something memorable that jumps into your mind?
I mean, there's nothing really that stands out except that when I think about translating for Sensei, I think about, fun. It seemed to me fun, right? Like he was always making jokes, so you had to. This is also important, right? This is something that some translators didn't get, and I think I did a good job with it. Was his jokes. To translate a joke, you have to have a rhythm, and you have to deliver it with that rhythm that he's delivering it with, and you have to be right on his coattails, right? Like he can't say a joke, then you have to like dissect it and then try to repeat it, right? You've got to be like, he says the line, you're saying the line, like you've got to be like right there with him, and I think I did a good job with that because when I was translating his jokes a lot, they seemed to go over well. And I think translating jokes was kind of hard. I don't know if that makes any sense or whatever. Maybe I'm just, babbling at this point.
No, I think that's excellent. It's fantastic because you're right. A personality comes through in jokes, and it's all timing and delivery, and you've got to have that nuance for it to hit the same way. And jokes are very personal, and someone's humor is very personal. It's part of, I guess, the essence of who they really are and what they show.
I think my most memorable thing that stands out is just that it was fun. It was fun to translate for him. And yeah, there were some things that really stand out to me, but I don't think it really is about translating. It's about Sensei as a person and some of the things that I translated that were interesting.
What do you mean by that? I'm interested.
Well, this is like a whole story for another video, but I'll do it shortly here. There was a young kid came in and said, "Sensei, can you paint the Marunouchi?" And the Marunouchi, if you don't know what that is it's the Enso with the one inside it. And this was the sign that Takamasa Sensei had on his tea shop, Marunouchi. So this kid says, "Hey Sensei, can you paint the Marunouchi for me?" And Sensei, "Yeah, sure." Boom, he writes it. Wow, it's pretty easy, right? Enso and a one. I shouldn't say it's easy because an Enso and a one is very difficult to actually make look artistic. So he writes it. Boom, gives to the kid. Kid walks off. Sensei's done painting, and I'm cleaning up. I've cleaned everything up, and Sensei's taking a break. And so the kid comes up to me, says to me, says, "Hey man, what does this mean?" And I'm like, "What?" Like you you just you didn't know what it meant and you asked for it. Well, that's interesting, right? And so I had just gotten back from like India and I'd been studying a lot of the yogic philosophy and the Vedas and they'd been giving me a lot of insight into our art and what some of these symbols meant. So when he asked me what it meant, my brain went into this like complex calculation, like universe and manifestation, unmanifest, and void. And I'm thinking, oh man, how am I gonna, how am I gonna, convey this to this young kid? I mean, I'm just wrapping my head around it right now, right? Manifests all of manifestation and you know things like the mustard seed from Christianity comes in your mind. All these things are like that meme where all the calculus comes in and you're like, oh no. And I'm like, say, well, all of manifestation and the kid's eyes are going blank, right? I'm going, I'm going, yeah, this is this is not getting through. This is not it. I'm not helping this kid, right? And I'm like, I got the idea. I said, oh,
Mm.
let's go ask Sensei. Because I'm a little devious myself, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna get Sensei now. I'm gonna trap this man because he's not gonna be able to explain this either. There's no way. There's no way you can explain this sign, this symbol to this kid. There's no way. So I'm like, come on. I'm thinking, I got it. I got you now, Sensei. Just like he done to me all those times, like put me on the spot. And, I'm like, I got it. I got him. I got him now. Like, let's go. So I grab this kid's arm and Sensei stands up from his break and he hands me his teacup. And I say, oh, Sensei, by the way, this guy wants to know what this symbol means. And Sensei takes it, looks at it, he's like, oh, he's like, this means to be a great gentleman and to have great manners. Be the best gentleman you can be and have great manners and treat people with respect. And the kid's eyes light up and he's like, I get it. I'm like, son of a bitch. He got me. He got me again, right? Because in the end, if you boil it down to certain things, you could say that. Like, I think there's a yogi in India, right? Shivananda. He says, uh, be good, do good, right? You know, so Sensei boiled it down to like, be a gentleman, have the greatest manners, treat people with respect. And I was like, God damn it, he got me again. What a great answer, and what a way for Sensei to, they say that, the sign of a master is not someone who can explain something complex, very detailed, right? But who can just take something super complex and make it so like a 2 or 3 year old or, a 5 year old can understand it. And that's what he did. And I
Yeah.
was, I was blown away. Again, he blew my mind again, because I thought I'd got him. I really thought I was going to get him. And you couldn't get it. You couldn't get that guy. It was like grabbing smoke. And that's why I stayed around him so long. He was just ungraspable in a certain respect.
I think that's a great place to leave it there for now. I think there's heaps of fantastic information there. Thank you so much for taking the time for such a random, out of the blue question as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking me these questions. If it weren't for, you asking me questions, I wouldn't have the ability to chat and share some of these stories with everybody. So thanks a lot.